We'll talk about electronic discovery, or in other terms, e-discovery, the act of discovering electronic information that's on corporate networks for legal purposes. E-discovery is probably not complete without a discussion of what discovery is overall. Discovery is a process by which parties in some type of court case or litigation obtain evidence from the other side. So if I'm one company suing another, we can do discovery on each other. Their lawyers can collect information from me. My lawyers can collect information from the other company. And all of that, request for documents or evidence, is all part of the discovery process. Electronic discovery, then, is the portion of discovery that is done on electronic documents or electronic information. And this is collectively referred to as electronically stored information, or ESI. ESI is any data stored in electronic format. It doesn't matter what kind of file format it is or where it originated from, as long as it's subject to the e-discovery rules. There are certain kinds of data that can be discoverable under the e-discovery rules. Electronically stored information, again, could be a whole bunch of different file formats, different types of files, and it goes beyond just traditional Word documents. So this could be, and most commonly, is emails. You saw electronic discovery or e-discovery during the Enron case about, show me emails from this person to that person, and they had to disclose that. So it can be emails, documents, spreadsheets, PowerPoint diagrams. Could also be photos or audiovisual files, social media postings, website blog postings, and it can even include raw data like for forensic analysis, like Slack space on a hard drive or something to that effect. These ESI is frequently categorized by its frequency of use and ease of accessibility. And there are different categories for this which determine whether the data can be discovered or not by the other party in a litigation effort. So here are the categories of ESI and whether they are accessible and therefore can be discovered by the other party. For different categories, you can see they relate mostly to how available is this information. But there's the first category, active online. These are examples of this would be hard drives or active network servers where you actually have data currently being used and it's readily available. From an accessibility standpoint, they call that reasonably accessible, meaning I can get into it, I can pull information from it in some type of reasonably quick manner. The next category down is what they call near online or nearline category. And these are information that might be stored on optical discs or tapes that are automatically accessible, meaning I've got a tape system that's all online that I can write files to. So it's kind of like a hard drive, but with an optical disc or tape. And they call that reasonably accessible as well, because if I can access it without requiring any special actions or procedures, then it's reasonably accessible. Then there's offline storage and archives. This might be burning DVD discs or making backup tapes that is stored offline or archived. This is also considered reasonably accessible, where I'm putting data files, not necessarily in a compressed archive like you would find with a backup, but maybe I'm just copying data from point A to point B so that I've got another copy of it, another backup copy of it. And that's offline storage and archives. That's also considered reasonably accessible. Where we start getting into not reasonably accessible are things like compressed backup tapes, where you're writing gigabytes of data on a incremental or full backup basis. This is not considered to be reasonably accessible because you would have to find those tapes or that backup media, restore the backup to a drive. That whole process means that it's not readily available to you and therefore not reasonably accessible. And the last case is a category of data where it was either erased or corrupted. Perhaps files were deleted en masse, or maybe things were overwritten. That information also is not considered to be reasonably accessible, and therefore couldn't be turned over during an e-discovery process. The e-discovery process itself goes through several phases. We'll talk through each of them. The first phase is identification, where the actual request is made for what is or how to determine what data is responsive, and what data could we get as the other party in this litigation. So here you're trying to identify what the data sources are, who the owners are of that data. And then you're starting to look at the scope of the data. You can't just go in and say, all right, give me all the hard drives for your organization, because it's an e-discovery request and therefore I'm entitled to it. You have to scope that down. So it's okay to say, show me all the hard drives in the organization, but I want to see all the files that were created or modified on or after a certain date. So you have to provide some scoping to it. You can't just throw the net out wide and say, give me everything. So you scope it as part of the identification phase. Preservation, once that request is made for that data, the data has to be placed on a legal hold, which means you can't touch it. You can't go in there and delete the data after it's been requested. That is considered illegal. That is fraud. And that will get you in trouble with a whole host of federal agencies if you choose to do that. So preservation means I've asked for these set of files, put them on hold, make a forensically sound copy of it if you have to, but we don't want to do what's called spoil. You don't want to spoil the data either through intentional means or unintentional means, and you don't want that data to be destroyed. You don't want that potential evidence to go missing. So once that request is made, you have to put that data in preservation, which means probably pulling hard drives out of systems, putting them in a safe somewhere, and storing them for the rest of the e-discovery process that we'll talk about here. Collection. So once you've requested the data, it's been pulled and it's being preserved, you have to transfer that to probably your legal counsel first, who's going to determine whether that data is relevant and applicable to the e-discovery request. There are software programs that will do this for you if you are in the unfortunate position of being a frequent target of e-discovery requests. Then there are software programs that will do all this for you, package everything up, and send it to your internal counsel, who will then take over the e-discovery process from there. Processing, this is where the files are taken from their original media. Perhaps they're stored in a document management system or some other type of review, such that it goes through some type of duplicate removal or processing to make sure that the data that you're actually going to provide is data and nothing extraneous. So it's kind of an optimization effort to make sure that you hand over the data that's relevant. Review, here you're looking for does the data match the request? Is it covered by attorney-client privilege? There are platforms and programs out there that can help you with this. There are tools out there that can help you go through the documents and make sure that everything is as requested and what is designed or what is needed. And then finally, production phase here. You're taking that data that you've processed and munged together and reviewed and made sure it's all okay. You're taking that data and passing it over to the opposing counsel and answering the e-discovery request. And you're answering based on what they asked for. Here are either the native files or here are PDF copies, what are called petrified format, documents that can't change easily, alongside with any metadata in that, along with those documents. So in the final step here, you've actually reviewed it, you know what you're handing over to the opposing counsel, and then it's theirs, and they can take it and do whatever they need to it for evidence or building a case, as it may be. There are a lot of different stakeholders in the e-discovery process. There are usually attorneys all over this, legal counsel on your side. You might have internal counsel, external counsel. The opposing party will have their internal and potentially external counsel as well. So this is generally a big lawyer fest. You've got lawyers all over this. You probably will also have forensic specialists along with IT and the security folks looking at actually obtaining the data and providing it as input to the e-discovery process. The business unit management is probably involved in this from identifying the data and where it might be located. HR is usually looking at it from a privacy perspective. Are there things in this data set that we're turning over that should not be released, or we might run into privacy issues if we do release it? Records managers might look at this from a data owner perspective, similar to what business unit managers might be looking at, to identify where does this data sit, what kind of content can we give them to satisfy the e-discovery request. And then the last group of stakeholders you might have here are a set of vendors who are working with the e-discovery frameworks or the support tools, and so you might have vendor support as part of this entire process. The challenges. There are a significant number of challenges with e-discovery. In the previous slide, you saw the entire list of stakeholders. Probably not a comprehensive list, but pretty close. There's a lot of stakeholders involved in this process. Each one of those stakeholders are going to come to the table with their own set of requirements, with their own agenda, and the lawyers have to sort out how to adjudicate all of those priorities, and again, most of them are competing priorities. So at the very least, you're managing all these stakeholders, but some of the bigger issues might be estimating the collection size. All right, how do I've got 600, 1,000 workstations out there that we could pull data from. Laptops that have been in storage, active use laptops. I mean, we have all these systems out there. How do I know what data I need to provide to the opposing counsel? And so it can be a very big effort to figure out what do I actually have to give them. And trying to estimate that size and how much data you actually need to provide them could be difficult. Preventing alteration of data. This will land you in jail or fined. This is the thing that you really want to prevent, is once that e-discovery request is made, you want to make sure that stuff doesn't change. So it's really incumbent upon you, once you receive that request, to put that legal hold on the documents that have been requested or the systems that have been requested to make sure that you don't land yourself in contempt for violating the e-discovery request. That's kind of what WorldCom and Enron did back in the early 2000s, was getting rid of all the evidence. Didn't bode well for them, probably won't work for you either. So I wouldn't recommend it. Finding the best review tools in the environment. The e-discovery process is not something you want to learn as you're going through it. So I would suggest you look at doing this ahead of time, going through, kind of stepping through what the process might be, figuring out what tools you need to help you through the process, and do that up front. Managing mobile and social networking data. All of this stuff, this type of data changes very rapidly. From a crisis communication standpoint, statements can be made almost instantaneously with this sort of stuff. And so it generally is, again, that fight to control the release of information and make sure that things don't change. Controlling costs associated with this. You can imagine with not only all the stakeholders, but with the predominance being lawyers, now all of a sudden you have a high prevalence of high hourly bill rate individuals working on this, and it can get very, very expensive. But in addition to that, look at your scoping of the data that you actually have to provide. If you've got to go scrub all the workstations and start pulling hard drives out of it, now you've got your entire IT staff or your IT security staff involved in this process for weeks. So costs from a monetary perspective, certainly, but from a what is going to get dropped on the floor so I can answer this request, there's a cost associated with that as well that you shouldn't discount. New regulations and data privacy security laws. It always seems that the regulations are constantly updated. Each state has a different set of regulations. Federal has a set of regulations. And once you go international, there's yet another set of regulations that you have to deal with. And so keeping up to date on what those laws are, what the requirements are for doing e-discovery can be challenging sometimes because you don't know what's changed. My advice, go hire an expert who can navigate this for you if you have to go through something like this. And then the last point there, we already mentioned the big stakeholder list. How do you simply communicate with everybody? Communication is a big challenge regardless of what you're doing and who you are, but in a time-sensitive, high-stress environment where you've got potential litigation on the horizon, this can become a significant challenge too.